There's a number that every government in the world carries with it. A number that never goes down. A number that politicians argue about, economists debate, and journalists reference constantly, and yet almost nobody ever asks the most obvious question about it. When does it actually get paid back? The answer, if you're willing to sit with it, is uncomfortable. And it changes how you see almost everything about modern government finance. Let's start with a simple scenario. Imagine you borrow money to renovate your house. You take out a loan. You pay it back over 10 years. At the end of those 10 years, the debt is gone. Clean. Done. That's how most people understand debt, as a temporary condition with a finish line. Now imagine you never pay it back. You just borrow more to cover the interest, then borrow more again. And every time the loan comes due, instead of paying it off, you take out a new loan to replace it. Not to get out of debt, just to stay in it, on slightly different terms. That's not a hypothetical. That's sovereign debt. That's exactly how the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and nearly every major economy in the world operates. Right now, today, the U.S. national debt crossed $34 trillion in 2024. But here's the thing most people miss. That number isn't really meant to reach zero. It never was. When the U.S. government issues a treasury bond, it's borrowing money with a promise to pay it back at a future date, plus interest. When that date arrives and the bond matures, the government doesn't typically pull out a checkbook and settle the balance. It issues new bonds. It rolls the debt forward. The original creditors get paid, but with money borrowed from new creditors. The clock resets. The pile grows. This has been happening without interruption for over a century. And the strange part, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. Here's why governments decided this was acceptable, and why, for a long time, it actually made sense. A growing economy generates more tax revenue over time. So in theory, even if the total debt number keeps rising, as long as the economy grows faster than the debt, the burden becomes relatively smaller. Economists measure this as debt to GDP, the ratio of what you owe versus what your economy produces in a year. After World War II, the U.S. carried enormous debt, but the economy grew so fast through the 1950s and 60s that the ratio shrank dramatically, not because the debt was paid off, but because the economy outran it. That's the bet. Always has been. Growth outpaces debt, forever. Now here's where the math gets uncomfortable. That bet requires two things to stay true. Interest rates have to stay manageable, and economic growth has to keep showing up. For most of the last 4 decades, both of those things held. Rates stayed low, growth was steady enough. The system hummed along quietly. Then something shifted. Between 2022 and 2024, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates aggressively to fight inflation. And suddenly, the cost of carrying all that debt started rising. Fast. The U.S. government is now spending more on interest payments than on national defense, more than on Medicare. The interest alone on the national debt crossed $1 trillion annually in 2023. $1 trillion a year. Just to stand still. And here's the quiet absurdity buried inside that number. That interest gets paid by issuing more debt. So the government is borrowing money to pay the interest on money it already borrowed. The hole doesn't get deeper every year because of new spending along. 1. It gets deeper because the hole itself has a cost, and that cost keeps compounding. Nobody votes on this. It just happens, mechanically, structurally. The way compound interest works against anyone who carries it too long. So why doesn't this collapse? Because the system depends on something that's almost philosophical: confidence. As long as creditors, foreign governments, banks, pension funds, investors, believe the United States can manage its debt, they keep buying treasury bonds. They keep rolling it over. The music keeps playing. The moment that confidence wavers, the moment investors start demanding higher returns to compensate for the risk of lending to the U.S. government, the cost of everything goes up: mortgages, car loans, business, borrowing. The entire economy breathes through the same pipe that government debt flows through. Japan has been running debt to GDP above 200% for years. Still standing. So clearly the ceiling is higher than most people assume. But Japan also owns most of its own debt domestically. That's a very different arrangement than owing it to the world. There's no precise moment when this becomes a crisis. That's what makes it genuinely difficult. The line between sustainable and unsustainable isn't a number, it's a mood, a shift in sentiment, a Tuesday when investors decide the math no longer adds up, and governments know this. Which is exactly why the goal was never repayment. The goal was to keep the confidence alive long enough for growth to make the question irrelevant. Whether that still works, in a world of slowing growth, rising rates, and aging populations, is the question nobody in power wants to answer directly. Maybe because they already know what the honest answer sounds like.